G'day groovers, rockers, and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with founding member of the Delltones, Ian Peewee Wilson. The Delltones were formed in 1958 and would be a part of what would become known as the first wave of pop music in Australia. They experienced their first era of success in the late 50s and early 60s, with songs such as Come a Little Bit Closer and Get a Little Dirt on Your Hands. During the later 60s and throughout the 1970s, their fame faded as music tastes changed. However, despite this, they made a massive comeback in the 1980s with their album Bop Til Ya Drop. Peewee wrote about his time in the band in his 2013 book, Come a Little Bit Closer, and the group did their last tour in 2016. G'day Peewee, and welcome to Vinyl Vibes.
Good morning, Jack. Great to talk to you.
Let's start off at the beginning, Peewee. You were born in 1940 in Sydney. What can you tell me about Sydney at that point in time?
I lived not very far from Bronte Beach, around about 500 metres from the beach, overlooking the beach in a third-storey flat that I lived with my mum and dad. Spent all my formative years on the beach. So it was a great place to grow up and a great environment. It was a fantastic time. Post-war period, so our parents were all in good shape and they were all happy, and it was a happy time.
What was some of the music you were kind of growing up? Like, it's born in 1940. I mean, like, you would have probably heard a lot of were your parents like into the jazz music of the 40s? Like, did you grow up with that?
They certainly were. They were into swing music, and they used to dance away, and I was too. I mean, during the 50s, the 40s music was still hot on the radio, but it was quite eclectic, the radio back then. I mean, there was all sorts of songs on there. There was folk music, and there was novelty music, songs like Purple People Eater and Itchy Witchy Teeny Weeny Polka Dot Bikini was another song that was a big hit. Also, we had Sinatra, we had Crosby, we had all those many varieties of singers that were on there. So the hit parade was something very, very special. It was all different types of music. So I grew up in that time, and that sort of reflected when we first started the band, was we weren't too sure just what genre of music we were going to settle on.
I mean, of course, I've heard that a big influence on the Delltones was the Diamonds, the American group, the Diamonds. Do you remember hearing them like for the first time?
Oh, yes, indeed. In fact, we modelled ourselves off that band. You know, most of us around in that first wave of Australian music were searching around, and the Diamonds we settled on as the music that we wanted to do, because it had the same vocal arrangement, the two top tenors and the baritone and the bass voice, and they were white, of course. We didn't understand the difference between the black and white music. We could certainly sing the harmonies of the black music at the time, like the Drifters and the Platters and so forth, but we certainly couldn't sort of quite get the feel. We didn't quite know the difference between the black music and the white music, and the white music and the white bands were sort of ripping off the black music. The Diamonds were doing the same thing, but their song Walking Along and Little Darling we did in our first set that we had.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you love the beach, and of course you were part of the local surf club, and from what I understand, that's how the Delltones kind of formed. Like, the other members were part of the surf club as well. Am I right on that?
That's right, exactly. Yeah, we're all members of the Bronte Surf Club and all active lifesavers. So when the song Hangin' Fire, written by Ben Acton, the last surf club member, came along, we grabbed it right away. The song Hangin' Fire, of course, has no reference to the sort of the Beach Boys or Jan and Dean and those sort of groups with the top falsetto. We still use the Diamonds sort of prototype sound, the doo-wop sound, and so Hangin' Fire was a natural hit for us. But of course, the surf music died off after a while, and then we were looking for more sort of pop music rather than surf music.
I mean, we're talking like 58 here when you guys formed. I mean, was it pretty easy to get gigs back then? Because I've read that your first gig, I think you like started singing like doo-wop songs randomly somewhere, and a restaurant owner like heard you and booked you. I mean, was it pretty easy to get gigs back then?
Well, when we first started, of course, we sort of followed the American doo-wop sound. We always, as I said before, we were looking towards there for guidance. We would do as the American doo-wop, coloured doo-wop groups would do. We would pull up, jump out of the car on the side on the footpath and start to harmonise and gather a crowd. We weren't looking for gigs in that first few months of the formation of the band, but that's what we were doing, and we did that. We were in King's Cross in Sydney. We were sort of singing outside a club, and the guy came out, the proprietor, and said, "Listen, come down and do a couple of songs for us," which we did, and we were paid in spaghetti and beer. And he sort of said, "Well, it was a Friday, I think it was." He said, "Well, look, I'll book you for Saturday night too if you can come back." And we thought, "Oh, maybe there is something in this." In terms of answer your question, it was a bit difficult to get gigs when you're not known, but it didn't take long before we were swept up in the gig world, and we were doing pubs and well, we were doing sort of talent quest and so forth, and we were doing quite well. But it was a pretty early start for us because we kicked into with Johnny O'Keefe when we only had a repertoire of about 5 songs. So it was a real kick start for us.
And I have to ask too, was the spaghetti any good in the end?
Not good enough to get us back the next night, no.
Talking like your early gigs back then, I mean, because that was, you guys didn't play instruments, that was just harmonising and singing, right?
That's right. We were a doo-wop vocal group, and they were very popular in those days, the vocal groups. As I mentioned before, those names like the Platters and the Diamonds and the Drifters, all of these groups, and the Diamonds, of course, all of these groups, we had the right sort of vocal ensemble, so it was naturally that was the way we were going to go. We never thought of playing instruments, even though Brian Perkins, one of the originals, was a drummer, and Noel Widerberg, the original lead vocalist, was quite a competent piano player. He did all the harmonies and worked everything out. He was the leader of the band, and the rest of us, apart from Perkins, were novice as far as instruments went.
And of course, I mean, one of the hardest things in a band is, I think, always trying to find the name. And I mean, was it hard to come up with the name, the Delltones? Like 'cause some bands, like they go for months trying to find a name and they don't get one. I mean, was it a hard process finding a name for your group?
Well, it wasn't, because there was quite a few bands around, vocal groups around that had the starting prefix of Dell. As I mentioned, the band before, Dell Vikings were one of them, and forget what the other ones were, but nevertheless, it was Warren Lucas, one of the originals, that came up with the name, the Delltones. It was quite easy. Dell, of course, is Spanish for these, so it really means the tones.
I love this story when you guys walked into 2GB in Sydney and you were looking for the disc jockey Bob Rodgers and you wanted to sing for him. And yeah, and of course you sang for him and he rang up Lee Gordon, and that's how you guys really got started in the business.
That's exactly right. We went down after auditioning for Bob Rodgers, who was the DJ at the time. Matter of fact, the interesting thing about Bob Rodgers was he was playing a lot of rock and roll. Rock and roll was only just beginning to make an impression on the charts. And after Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel and then songs by the Platters and so forth that followed that, he was getting records that were being brought in from overseas by Qantas air stewards. There was just no, the American record, the Australian record companies, I should say, just weren't even interested in American records at that time. So he was bringing them in from the United States with under the arm of Qantas stewards. So he was really the hip guy at the time. As you mentioned, he did call Lee Gordon, the promoter. I remember Bob Rodgers saying to Lee Gordon, "I've got your vocal group here for your backups for Tab Hunter." After hanging up, he sent us down to his office, and lo and behold, inside there was Lee Gordon, was Johnny O'Keefe, and both of them agreed that the Delltones could do the job. So they handed us the 2 records and said, "Learn these records." And Johnny O'Keefe said, "Well, you can do some of my backups. So here's a few of my records. Learn off the records, and we'll put you on the show," which we did, and we opened up. And that was only about 2 or 3 months after we formed.
Because when you were backing Johnny O'Keefe, was that when he was playing? Because I mean, in Australia, we had like a few of the international acts like Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard coming over, and he kind of played with them like on the tours. I mean, was that on those tours, or was that like just by himself that you were playing with him?
No. It was in those days, of course, the stadium shows around Australia, Festival Hall in Melbourne, Festival Hall in Brisbane, for example. The American shows were packed with artists. I mean, on that show, I think the first show that we did was Tab Hunter, the actor. Then we had Sal Mineo. There was the Everly Brothers. All of these acts were coming out, and we were doing a lot of backies for these acts on the stage. So there was about 4 or 5 of those stadium shows that came out with a lot of American artists and a lot of Australian artists. We only did about 10, 15 minutes each, and then you just run on, do your 10 or 15 minutes, run off, and the next act would come on. So it was a big turnover, but it was quite an incredible atmosphere at the Sydney Stadium. It was quite remarkable and unforgettable.
I didn't realise that they made a film called Rock and Roll in 1959. It was like the only, in the 50s, the only entire concert ever filmed, and they've only recently rediscovered it in 2020. I mean, that must have been a great moment for you, if you're aware of it, that they've rediscovered the entire footage of it.
Yes, indeed, and the Delltones have got about, I think they've got about 9 or 10 minutes on that show, and that was the Fabian show. Fabian was one of those acts that was pulled off the street by the American entrepreneur. I think his name was Frank Gucci or something. And anyway, I forget his name now, but he promoted Fabian, and Fabian was an incredible looking guy, but he had no chops at all. He had no voice at all. It was quite remarkable. That show, yes, as you say, is now beautifully filmed in black and white. They might have colorised it, but however, that show is playing around Australia at the moment. I think it played at the Hendy Theatre in Sydney, and it caused quite a stir. Yeah, it is a remarkable piece of footage and something that will go down in history.
And of course, through Lee Gordon, you got signed to his record label, Lead On Records, I think it was called. Yeah, and of course, I think it was within the week that you got signed, you cut your first record, A-side, I think it was G, B-side Y. What do you remember? Do you remember much of those recording sessions?
Well, yeah, because they were recorded at Festival Records, even though they were on the Lead On label, Lee Gordon's label. Those two records were quite remarkable. G was a version that we did of the Craze song called G, as I mentioned. And the only thing I remember remarkable about that record recording was the fact that, apart from the fact that Johnny O'Keefe produced it and changed the feel a bit, the song was only run for about, it was the shortest record on record, I think, only run about 2 minutes and 5 seconds. It was incredibly short and quick and over, maybe mercifully over quickly, I don't know. But the flip side was a song called Why, which Noel Widerberg had written very much in the doo-wop genre. We recorded it at Festival Records. We couldn't even put the drummer in the room. It wasn't big enough to put the drummer in the room. We had to put him outside in the office and run a line to the microphone out there. It was very different, and it was on two-track Ampex tape recorder on the side there. I remember that recording as vivid as today. It was quite an experience.
Did you ever discuss adding a verse here or there, or making it longer, maybe to the 2-minute 30 mark that was kind of standard at the time?
No, we didn't really. Look, as soon as it went out, we didn't take much notice until later. I thought, gee, that is a short record, and no one really remarked on it because it was early days. After we recorded G, was said, well, it's standard. We want to make all of our songs round about the 3-minute mark, a little bit under, a little bit over. That seemed to be the sort of attention span of the listener at the time that they thought. But no, we didn't think about it, but that's what was missing. We forgot to put in the guitar solo or some sort of musical interlude. We just didn't do it. But Why, on the other hand, was about 3 minutes and 10 seconds. I think we make the record there with that one as well, on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and of course, you mentioned too that 2-track tape. I would imagine, given that it was 2-track tape, you guys would have been doing most of that stuff live, like in the studio with no overdubs kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Everything was done live in those times. Very, very few overdubs because we didn't have the equipment to do it.
Of course, Johnny O'Keefe was the producer. What was he like as a producer, in those terms? Yeah.
Well, he seemed to be. He seemed to be that knew what was going on, and indeed he did, because he did his homework. He was to people like James Brown, and if you look at some of O'Keefe's footage in that movie, it's quite prominent. You'll see O'Keefe's stances and style and everything was modelled off James Brown, because his repertoire was full of gospel songs. He looked very closely at what was happening in America, and so that he seemed to know what was going on. We followed it. We just details, because he was the leader of the pack and knew what was going on. So we quite readily gave our future to him in the first few years, which he was our mentor and guide, because we were doing all of his vocal backings on, and as I say, he was somebody that seemed to know what was going on, and he was a very, very interesting personality. He was quite compatible in his moods and so forth. So he was good fun to be around.
And also, the B-side, Why, that was written by Noel Widerberg. And did you ever get to see much of Noel's writing process for songs?
No, in those days, Jack, it wasn't encouraged to write our own songs. The record company found it a lot easier in those days to sort of just pick an American that was doing well on the charts in America, and because it was on their label, they could then give it to an Australian performer. Now, we thought that was not a bad idea, but Widerberg, as you know, he was killed in a car accident. But leading up to that, I think he would have been developed into a good songwriter. He said, just like O'Keefe, what was going on, and he was a natural leader for the Delltones.
You really had the doo-wop sound going for you. Would you describe, because the Delltones sound has changed, over the years, but would you describe those early records as definitely doo-wop records? It
was the doo-wop sound, and we tried to retain that, Jack, right through our whole recording career. Our recording career was pretty sketchy. It's a little bit all over the place. The first few years we're doing fine, because which was the follow-up song. Was the first song that charted up G, or that did well for us on the charts. So that was a doo-wop song. Of course, Hang It 5, the surf song, wasn't pure doo-wop by any means. doo-wop element was there, using the bass voice and the type of harp setup that we had going. Also, of course, with Come a Little Bit Closer, which was later on doo-wop elements. Right through our whole career, the doo-wop elements have been in our later recordings, like Get a Job and Papa Oom Mau Mau. Those songs still have that strong doo-wop influence.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Peewee. No, totally agree. And of course, too, I was wondering too, as I was like listening to all these tracks, while I was writing these questions, and I was thinking like, we're talking 1959, kind of when your first records were coming out, and I was thinking like, when they were released, did they come out on 45 like records, or were they still making 78s at that point in 59?
No, they were 45s. All of them were 45s. That were the 70 on. And so it was a major, just as later on the format just changing over the years. But no, it was on 45.
You guys started at a time when TV in Australia was just starting to really get popular and was only really just starting, really. Kind of interested to know from your perspective, from the first wave of rock and roll, what role did TV play in making like Australian music successful, like domestically?
Well, enormous. It was an absolute important. So important, in fact, we would do these songs and sort of preempt them by putting them on, doing a song on television to see what reaction we would get from it. But the show that we did, two shows that we were doing at the time were 6 o'clock rock, which was must see. Everybody's to get ready. The TV on Saturday afternoon and catch 6 o'clock rock, and of course on the commercial channel, that was on ABC, of course, with Johnny O'Keefe, and on the commercial channels, on Channel 9 was Bandstand. Bandstand was very much middle of the road show, very much a wide range of pop music would be on that show, but both those shows, 6 o'clock rock and Bandstand, were instrumental in putting these songs on the charts. There was no doubt about that. Very, 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 very important part of our development. And of course, television was still a bit of a novelty for people. It was still something that people were just enamored with. They just wanted to watch it. And as you say, it was the real early, the first wave. There was a sense of breaking new ground on television and on radio. It was a very, very exciting period.
Did you know that at the time, like that you guys were breaking new ground, that this was like, because I mean, obviously it was something that like rock and roll and the way that people were interacting with music at that time had never happened before. I mean, was everyone kind of actively aware of that?
No, on the contrary. I mean, some of the radio stations, their announcers were saying that this is just a passing fad, and this horrible music will be out of the way soon, and we'll have a return to some sort of sanity when we get Bing Crosby back on and Pat Boone, and this is terrible. This is an aberration on the ear. We've got to get rid of it. And there was a movement. I remember one disc jockey. I think just his name. Well, I say disc jockey, but he wasn't. He was just an announcer. He was playing popular music for the time, playing a lot of jazz and so forth. And he was actually on the air breaking these 45s up, rock and roll 45s, breaking Little Richard's record. You could hear the snap of the vinyl, he was breaking Johnny O'Keefe, this horrible sound, this horrible noise. It won't last. It'll only be a passing fad. So there wasn't a sense of history. It was a sense of gather the rosebuds while we can, and we just jumped in there and thought this is going to be over very shortly. Personally, I mean, we were all wrong. It's lasted longer than the band, the Delltones were around for almost 60 years, so it's just quite remarkable.
Listening to other interviews like with you, and you made a very interesting comment that when you were making the records, like that, you didn't make it was more you made the records to get people to go to the live performances. It wasn't the other way around. I thought that was a very interesting perspective.
The singles were the most important format. Albums were just compilations of whatever single we had going at the time, and then a whole bunch of cover versions, and maybe throw in a self-penned song, but one or two. But that rarely happened. But so albums were never seen as big money makers in Australia at that time, and singles certainly. When I say album were money makers, they certainly weren't for the artist. They were for the record company. Because I remember, our deal was something like 5.5% of 85% of each album sold, or each single sold as well. less costs. So it was minuscule. We never had managers in those days that would broker a good deal for us. The deals were just set up by the record companies, and we were just so glad to sign them because we were getting on the record that it didn't make money was never a consideration. So the singles were basically seen as, because they weren't making money for us, that they were just seen as a publicity tool for our live performances, and they did just that. Our gigs begin to get really good houses and begin to fill up, and that's when we felt most secure when we had the gigs going.
And of course, I mean, that's such an interesting time in history too. I mean, from the perspective of the people buying the records, I mean, why were singles more popular than albums at that point? Like, why do you think that was?
Well, that's another good question, and I can't really answer it. I don't know. I think perhaps I can answer it by saying that in those days, teenagers was the sort of first time we coined that phrase, teenagers. The Americans and the Poms were calling them Bobby Soxers. But there was no real teen market. There was no teenage market for young. There was no marketeering going on for young people like today, like it developed later on in the 60s. But there was, as I say, the teenagers only had pocket money. The most they could sort of rake together, I suspect, would have been enough to buy a single. An album would have been well out of their pocket money. So it was only the parents that were buying the albums, and of course we were all kids, young and late teens and early 20s, and our market were the same sort of age group. So I think that's probably, to answer your question, I think that's probably the reason.
Yeah.
Just kids couldn't afford to buy an album at that stage. But of course later on albums began to develop, and then it went into the mid to late 60s, and the whole record business changed, and albums just took off, and things changed, and it changed for us as well.
You mentioned earlier with Noel and how he passed away, unfortunately. And I mean, the last song that you guys did with him was "Get a Little Dirt on Your Hands." And I'm wondering, like, do you have any memories from, like, and I'm assuming that was like the very last song you guys recorded with him. I mean, do you have any memories from that recording session, or the last one with Noel?
Well, it was "Get a Little Dirt on Your Hands" is what is called a Cradle to the Grave or Crib to the Crematorium record, which is quite ironic. Because it was, as you say, it was his last recording. And Widerberg did such a great, we did it at a live show, Widerberg did such a great vocal on it that we thought, well let's just give it a try and put it down. And Keith did produce that one as well, and gave it quite a different feel from the original, which was done by Bill Anderson. And we put a more folky sort of feel to it. And I do remember the session and Widerberg's vocal, and we didn't think it would take off because it was quite a different departure from our earlier genre type music, doo-wop music. Nevertheless, the doo-wop element is in there, but it's got a more of a folky feel. But it wasn't a song that we thought would take off, but it was it is a very, very good song, and well written and well performed by Widerberg. It may have changed our direction. Who knows? It lived on.
You know, the first few records were very much doo-wop records, but I wouldn't describe "Get a Little Dirt on Your Hands" as necessarily a doo-wop record. It definitely was a bit different. And I mean, in saying that, like, why do you, like, I mean, it reached number 3, it was a big hit. I mean, like, with that song, why do you think it was such a big hit? Did it speak to the people? Or was it the sound? Like, what do you think, why do you think people went out and bought the record? Yeah.
That was the part that we were moving along, the doo-wop, up-tempo, light-hearted music aimed at the heart and the feet. Previous to that, of course, we had songs like these songs didn't do very well on the charts, but songs like Wonder and You're the Limit did very well for us, which was poppy. But I just think it stood alone on its own, and the recording itself was good enough to do well. And that time, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, that the hit parade or the charts were full of such eclectic material that there was, as I said before, there was anything from big band swing right through to, you know, novelty songs like Itsy Bitsy Witsy Bitsy, whatever it was, Bikini. So it was quite wide and varied. So I think that song, it was a particularly good record, and one that it's probably my favourite out of all the recordings.
In saying that, you did mention Come a Little Bit Closer there, and I was listening to the record, and I was listening closely, and I was listening to the vocals particularly. That captured my mind, because I was listening to it, and it sounds like you guys had a bit of reverb on those vocals. I mean, was that possible back then to get reverb on the vocals?
Yes, it was, but we didn't have any machine to do that. for the reverb. In our case, we were using in Vestal's case, they were using the woman's toilet, the ladies' toilet, the ladies' loo. We run a line down to the ladies' loo. I remember it was in the ladies' loo in the bathroom. We had a plate. It was a sheet of glass, plate glass, up against the wall with a microphone hanging. I don't know why that was there. I don't know. It was Robert Ide, the sound engineer's idea, and it was a microphone and a speaker in there. And all it would do was come through the speaker, then back through the microphone and pick up the reverb that was in the room. And we've tried to re-record a couple of those songs, like Hanging Fire, Come a Little Bit Closer, but we were never, still with all the modern equipment and the digital equipment, we were never able to reproduce that full fat sound that was on Come a Little Bit Closer, particularly in the chorus. As you mentioned, that reverb was quite special. As I say, we've tried to recreate those records, that sound that was on those early records, the early vinyl records, but we were unable to do it. So it was a very, very special effect. And everybody was using it that was on festival. I don't know how they got it elsewhere, but when it went and they put in what was called plate echo, I think they called it, when that came along and replaced the toilet. We were sad to see it go, but the ladies were happy to be able to use their toilet again when we weren't recording.
I can imagine.
Quite crazy, really, when you think it. Quite crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy, but they were crazy days.
I think it's harmonica you have on the track, and I was thinking too, because we're talking about the overdubs there, and was the harmonica played live when you guys were doing that record, or yeah, or
yeah. Look, if my memory doesn't fail me, those very early records were done in '59 to about '62, '63. I think most of them we did apart. Even the drums, as I mentioned before, didn't have room to put the drummer. We had to put him out in the offices, which were adjacent to the recording studio. So it was just natural that we would put it down. And you could. Keith insisted on. However, as we developed, overdubs did start to creep in the early '60s, and I think that Robert Idale, the sound engineer, was able to set up some way of cutting and splicing these overdubs in. So it started to develop overdubs because we were looking towards American silence and what was happening in the studios over there. So it was the overdubs come a little bit later, but most of it was put down live, yeah.
And Peewee, something I love about the Delltones is you guys had a way to adapt to, like as you were saying, you went from doo-wop and then you embraced the surf music, which I think was a great strength of the band. Of course, Hangin' Five was a big hit, and would you say that's because there was no, there probably isn't a rule book now, but there certainly wasn't a rule book then. Do you think the fact that you guys didn't have, so to say, a rule book back then, that was why you were able to adapt so much back then?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's true. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the charts were so full of different styles of music, different genres of music, that it was hard for us at that time to settle on, because we were feeling we had the vocal group ensemble, we had that doo-wop ensemble, and we found that we could adapt songs to that feel. We could always use full setup as the lead with the one harmony above, the two harmonies below, the bass voice roaming and goofing around the bottom. It was easy for us to do that. Our style wasn't set in stone. And because it was so new, everything was so new. The Americans, of course, had been at it for some years up to this point, but this was, for us, it was all new. There was a sense of being on this first wave of popular music out here, and of course, that movie shows you the sort of reaction. We spoke about that movie of the stadium show earlier, which is now travelling around the country. If you look at that, you just see the reaction of the young people, of the audience, was just over the top. As I said before, there was a sense of being on this crest of a wave of something. You didn't know where it was going, but we were all sort of just having a ball. And the performance side of it, on record and on stage and on television, there was almost kind of parties. We were partying hard. Just so much fun, Oh man, drugs hadn't entered into the business at that early stage. It was just good, wholesome fun, Jack. You know what I mean? Good, wholesome fun. Out of our brains, we were completely nuts, And girls, chicks, My God, they were coming out of the woodwork. They were everywhere. They were just fun times, you know. And everybody was the audience were having a great time. We were having a great time. The musicians were having fun. Everybody was. It was truly fun days and fond memories of those early pioneering days. And music didn't take a serious turn until later on in the 60s when, as I say, the singer-songwriter came along and politics began into pop music, and the whole scene changed, and that naive innocence was lost, and we started to sing about the problems of the world.
We recently had the bass player of the Atlantics on, and I know they were the other, like they were a big surf group in Australia at the time. I mean, did you ever get to play with the Atlantics, or did you ever meet them? Or?
No, we didn't. You know, that's surprising. When you asked me that, it was occurring to me as you were talking there. No, we never did meet them. But of course, they were instrumentalists. Weren't vocal. But I think originally one of the early pop pioneers, they were Johnny Rebb's band originally. So they played behind him, and they branched out on his own. So we would have played probably some shows with them, but I have no recollection of actually chumming up to them at all. But we would have played with them. These shows, you know, you'd go along to do a same show, and you'd all have your own dressing rooms, and it was so heady, so whirlwind. You didn't know what was going on. You run on and do your sets, and then run off and disappear into the crowd. But no, I didn't. But what a wonderful group they were, and deservedly they deserved all the success they had.
I mean, a lot of the other surf groups, I think, at the time, you know, even though they were into the surf music and doing the surf music, I think you guys were maybe only one of the few that were actually into surfing.
Yes, we were. And there wasn't anybody from outside the surf club that was surfing. But of course, when the movie Gidget came out, it sort of popularised the music, and there was a breakaway surfy, what we call the surfy movement, which was quite different from the surf club music when the short board started to come out. So it was a breakaway movement from the surf club, from the establishment. But we stuck with the surf club, and I'm still sort of an associate member of the club.
We're talking 63 here. I mean, of course, next year, the year after 1964, the Beatles came onto Australian shores. I mean, from your perspective as someone that was, you know, a part of the first wave of pop music, I mean, to have the Beatles, you know, enter Australian music on the charts and actually tour here back in 64 on their world tour, I mean, how did they impact you?
Well, they made a tremendous impact. I mean, I remember listening, I think we were on tour and we were doing a show in Cairns, and I remember hearing I think it was Love Me Do came on, and this is something. There was a sense that we were going to be out of step. Here they were. They wrote their own music. They played their own instruments, and they didn't have a bass voice in the band. So for me, it was a little bit of a shock for me. I thought, you know, this is something, and it did change. It changed us. We went from virtually pop stars and went into cabaret then, and we started to do the clubs and theatres and the different types of venues. No, they made a tremendous impact on us, tremendous impact.
During the mid-60s to throughout the 70s, I mean, the Delltones weren't charting as much as they were. I mean, what was that period like for you?
Well, we were just coasting back then. All aspirations were just dropped, and we were just not inspired anymore and into our comfort zone, which was just basically resting on our laurels of the songs that we had on the 60s at the time. But then, of course, the band, we knew that was the end of us. Once we started it out, we knew that our pop thing was over. We were getting older. Those first wavers that were out were off the charts. So we followed suit. The British invasion came along, and as I say, we just settled into our comfort zone, rested on our laurels, and were just doing cabaret. But that didn't last all that long, of course, because, you know, in 1970 odd, the band split for a few years, and it wasn't until much later, until the late 70s, that we reformed and then tried to come back. The album Bop Til Ya Drop in 19, I think that was in 85. I think Bop Til Ya Drop, the revival, along, and we that one charted, got up to number 2 for a while there, Kent Report, and all of a sudden we were back on television again, and the revival was on full kick, full tilt. So we tried hard to get on the charts, but Countdown wouldn't have a bar of us.
Yeah, well, why do you think that was? Because I mean, Get a Job was probably the biggest song you had during the 80s. I mean, I can't understand why they wouldn't have put you on. Was it just do you have any idea maybe why that was?
Well, look, I probably age had a lot to do with it. We weren't kids anymore. Most that were younger performers. I think also they probably thought that we had our chance, or we had our go, and they wanted to put newer artists on, not necessarily ones that were revived. Other reasons, another one was that it was Countdown was Melbourne centric. It wasn't Sydney. It didn't have all the artists on. It did later on as things developed, as the show developed. Early on, it didn't have it, and it was like, very much like the way it was back in the Bandstand days, where Bandstand was the only show that was being shown. Melbourne didn't show until along come the Go Set and those other shows came along later on.
Regardless of on Countdown or not, it was a great comeback that you guys did in the 80s. And in terms of finding that, because as you said earlier in the interview, you've always had that kind of doo-wop feel to your songs throughout, your time in music. But how did you, in terms of and I'm more talking about, Get a Job Here, the song, and what was that process in trying to find a sound that was still in line with the doo-wop sound, but embraced the 80s a bit more? Was that a big process there for you guys, or was it pretty easy?
As you rightly put, the doo-wop music was doo-wop sound, and the doo-wop elements were still there to Get a Job. But we would done the song before, and it got such a good reception. But we also thought that if we could adapt the digital sound, combine it with the old doo-wop sound, and something that was able to cross over, retain that core element of doo-wop into a digital, which we did which I think we pulled off, and we changed it from a shuffle feel with from a bounce bum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum to a straight rock. So we changed the feel and used the Fairlight. We used the Fairlight and rather than using guitars or so, but it was very much a keyboard sound, which we adopted into our live performance as well. But now we found some of those songs that from that early period, and redoing them in the digital format was quite easy, and we had some very good producers, Russell Dunlop, and I'm trying to think of the producers who did that, Bruce Brown, both terrific and wonderful engineers, were able to down with the Fairlight, and we used Fairlight Moog synthesizer and various, and this was a fun period too, because we were getting back on again and doing the midday show, and we were getting on Hey It's Saturday, and we were able to do these songs on the show. But unfortunately, we could never get them to chart. But it was quite easy for us to adapt to those digital sounds.
Of course, we've spoken about with so many great stories in this interview, and of course, I wanted to draw attention to your book that you wrote in 2013, Come a Little Bit Closer. Probably hundreds of more great stories in that. What made you want to write about your life and put it in an autobiography kind of thing?
Well, I didn't. I didn't think that I had the capacity to do it at all. But my wife Carla was on to me. Come on, others are doing it, can't you do it? You've got lots of stories there. Why don't you put them down? Oh, no. I said, no one wants to hear these stories. But she insisted. So it was a pleasant nag on me, and so then well, maybe I'll just write it. Forget about literal and being a smart ass. Just write what I think is going to people are going to be interested in, or what, maybe just write it for the grandchildren. If all else fails, maybe they'll enjoy it. So I started it like that. But then there was some interest started to spark up from a publishing company, and so I put a little bit more effort into it, and just kept at it straight through. I was planning to over about 10 years, but it was only over 6 months that I wrote the book, and it turned out okay for me. I was quite pleased with the results, and there's some personal stuff in there as well as the history of the band in the early period, also history of the band during the 80s and the 90s. It was a book that could have gone on forever, but mercifully it stopped off at 300 pages, which was enough.
For any listeners that are wanting to get this book, Come a Little Bit Closer, what's the best place to go? Amazon? Can they get it off your website? Where can they go to get it?
Yeah, the website's the simplest thing about it, mate, and it's straight ahead. You're just onto the Delltones website, and it's available there.
Just before we close, Peewee, I just wanted to ask, so are you working on any projects at the moment, like music projects or any other kind of projects?
No, Jack, we're play at the moment. We settled down. We took a break about 2 years ago. We get a bit tired being on the road. There are various internal problems that we haven't resolved yet with the band, but it's always up in the air. We haven't fully retired. We didn't go out with a farewell tour or anything because we're keeping our option open. So you never know. Things could change in this business. Who knows? I do get people calling up, promoters calling up and saying, when are you going to get the band back together again? It's like the Blues Brothers. I think it'll happen one day, perhaps, because I'm still interested in the music and still talking to all the boys in the band. So who knows? It could come together. But at the moment, we're in limbo.
Peewee, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Jack. It's a pleasure from my point of view too. I really do enjoy it.
That was founding member of the Delltones, Ian Peewee Wilson. As of this interview, the Delltones are not performing, but if you like what you heard today, you can get Peewee's book, Come a Little Bit Closer, if you want to find out more about the band. To get the book, head to Peewee's website, delltones.com. Remember to share this episode with other music fans, and if you really enjoyed this edition, let us know. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Vinyl Vibes, and to all you music lovers out there, you stay groovy.